You think you'd know if something was wrong with the family across the street, the dad who coaches your kids, the mom who brings casseroles, the neighbor who treats your daughter like his own. The Brobergs of Pocatello, Idaho thought the same thing about the charming man 2 pews ahead of them at church. By the time they understood what he actually was, their 12-year-old daughter was already gone, and the strangest, darkest part of what he had done to her had not even started yet. Picture a man who shakes your hand at church on Sunday, coaches your kids' team on Tuesday, and by Friday has your whole family laughing around his dinner table. That is the kind of man no one warns you about. That is the kind of man who can take a 12-year-old girl out of her own bedroom and convince her parents to thank him for it. Pocatello, Idaho, 1972. If you have never been, picture a small mountain town tucked into the southeast corner of the state, wide streets, a Latter-day Saint church on what feels like every other block, and the kind of neighborhood where people still drop casseroles at the door when somebody's sick. That summer, 2 families ended up in the same pew at the same chapel, and from the outside, they looked almost interchangeable. On one side, you had Bob and Mary Ann Broberg. Bob ran a florist shop, Mary Ann kept the house, and they had 3 little girls. Jan, the oldest, was 10 years old, blonde, all knees and elbows, the kind of kid who lit up a room without trying. Then there were her younger sisters, Karen and Susan. 3 girls, 1 bathroom, a regular American family. On the other side, the Berchtolds. Robert Berchtold, but everybody called him B, his wife Gail, and their 5 kids. B was the kind of guy who walked into a room and you noticed. Big smile, big personality, businessman, charmer, the dad everybody else's kids wished they had. So when the 2 families started spending weekends together, nobody thought twice. The Berchtold kids and the Broberg kids ran around as if they were cousins. And here is where I have to slow down, because the thing about grooming, real, textbook grooming, is that it does not start with the child. It starts with everybody else. B did not corner Jan in a back room. He sat at the Brobergs' kitchen table for 2 years, eating Mary Ann's cooking, slapping Bob on the back, and quietly making himself indispensable. He took the girls to amusement parks. He helped Bob in the back of the florist shop. He started calling Mary Ann at home, mid-morning, asking her to bring him lunch out at his property, and she did. Bob noticed and said nothing, because what do you say? B was their best friend. Then in January of 1974, the church quietly rebuked B for what was described as an inappropriate relationship with a young girl. Not Jan, somebody else. The Brobergs heard about it, and they let it pass. Because right around the same time, B told them he had a problem. He said he had been seeing a psychiatrist, and the doctor had told him he had a deep psychological wound, something from his own childhood, and the only thing that could heal it was sleeping next to a, quote, innocent presence. A child. Specifically, he said, their child, Jan. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because it is genuinely one of the strangest things I have ever read in a case file. A grown man asked to sleep in a 12-year-old's bed 4 nights a week while playing self-help tapes through headphones. And the parents, devout, church-going, decent people, said yes, for 6 months. Jan herself, decades later, has said she just thought it was weird. She did not understand what was happening. She did understand that B was the most important grown-up in her world, more present than her own father some weeks. He told her she was special. He told her nobody else would ever understand her the way he did. By October of that year, the groundwork was done. On the morning of October 17th, 1974, B pulled up outside the Broberg house and told Mary Ann he was taking Jan out near American Falls to go horseback riding. Jan climbed into the cab of his pickup. Mary Ann waved from the porch. And that is the last picture of normal life that family would ever get. There was no horseback ride. B drove Jan to a motorhome he had waiting, gave her a couple of pills, and told her they were for her allergies. She trusted him. She took them. The next thing she remembers, she was waking up in a moving vehicle, her wrists strapped to the bed frame, somewhere on a highway pointed south. B drove for days. Across Utah, across Arizona, across the Mexican border, all the way down to the Pacific coast, a resort town called Mazatlan. And while she drifted in and out, he set up the centerpiece of what he had been planning for 2 solid years: a tape recorder, headphones, and a story. The voices on the tapes told Jan she was not entirely human. They told her she was part alien, that beings from a distant, dying planet had chosen her, only her, to bear a child that would save their species. The voices said she had a male companion, and her companion was B. If she refused, if she told anyone, if she ever had contact with a boy her own age, her family would die. Her little sister Karen would go blind. Her parents would be killed. That was the deal. She was 12. She had never seen Star Wars. Nobody had. It didn't exist yet. The science fiction in her head was whatever B put there. And he kept the tapes running day after day in a motorhome 1,000 miles from anyone who knew her name. Back in Pocatello, Bob and Mary Ann started to worry. Not right away, though. Hours passed. A day passed. 2 days. Gail Berchtold, B's wife, kept telling them to stay calm, that B sometimes did this, that he would bring Jan back. So they waited. It took until October 22nd, 5 days, before Mary Ann finally picked up the phone and called the FBI. Now here is something the abuser had also done while he was preparing all of this. Sometime before the kidnapping, he had engineered a single, brief sexual encounter with Bob Broberg. One time. Bob, by every account, was deeply ashamed of it and told no one. B knew exactly what that shame was worth. On November 23rd, after about 5 weeks in captivity, the FBI and Mexican authorities raided the motorhome in the middle of the night and pulled Jan out. B was arrested, and the family should, by every law on the books, have been at the start of a very long prison sentence for him. Instead, what happened next is the part of this case that still makes lawyers grind their teeth. From a jail cell, B sent word to the Brobergs. Sign affidavits saying you knew about the trip, say you gave permission. Or, and this was the threat in writing, I will tell the world what your husband and I did. Bob signed. Mary Ann signed. The federal kidnapping case collapsed almost overnight. B was sentenced to 5 years in prison and 5 years probation. Then a judge suspended almost all of it. He served around 10 days. 10 days for taking a 12-year-old to Mexico, marrying her under a foreign law that allowed it, and doing what he did in that motorhome. And then it gets stranger, because once B was out, Mary Ann Broberg, the mother, began an affair with him. It lasted around 8 months. Jan was back in the house. The man who had kidnapped her was sleeping with her mother. Bob finally broke in March of 1976, filed for divorce, took the girls, and that was the only thing that ended it. Mary Ann came back. The family stitched itself badly back together, and for a few months it was almost quiet. B had moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, opened a family fund center, and from a distance he wrote letters. He made phone calls to Jan, who was now 14. The tapes were still playing in her head. The mission, she believed, was still active. He was still her companion. And on the night of August 10th, 1976, he showed up at her bedroom window. He told her to pack a bag. He told her to write a note that said she was running away. She did. She climbed out, got into his Lincoln Continental, and they drove west, all the way to Pasadena, California. In Pasadena, he enrolled Jan in an all-girls Catholic boarding school under a fake name. He told the nuns there that he was a CIA agent who had just barely escaped Lebanon. He told them Jan's mother was dead, killed, he said, in the same operation. He left her with the sisters during the week, and on weekends, he drove back to abuse her. For 4 months, nobody in California questioned him. He was that good a liar. It ended because the FBI this time had been wiretapping the Broberg phone since the first call. They traced BTK's calls. On November 12, 1976, agents picked him up in Salt Lake City. When they searched his motorhome, they found the walls covered, and I mean covered, in poster-sized photographs of Jan. Her face everywhere. He had built a shrine on wheels. Jan came home to Pocatello a few weeks before Christmas. Mary Ann later said there was nothing left of her daughter. The girl who came back through the front door wore Jan's face and Jan's clothes, but the lights behind the eyes were off. In June of 1977, B finally went on trial in Idaho's 6th District Court for kidnapping, for burglary, and for arson, because while he had been sitting in jail, he had arranged for somebody to torch Bob Broberg's florist shop. And here again, the system did exactly what it had done the first time. He pled insanity. The court bought it. He was sentenced to roughly 6 months in a psychiatric facility. That was the entire punishment for the second kidnapping. Meanwhile, Jan was at home trying to be a teenager, going to school, doing homework, eating dinner, and under all of it running constantly like a radio she could not turn off the voices. The mission, the companion, the deal, she still believed every word. She did not tell her parents, she did not tell a counselor. She could not, because in her mind telling meant Karen would go blind, her mom and dad would die, and the planet she was supposed to save would die with them. So she carried it, alone, for years. B walked free, moved on with his life, and the Brobergs slowly tried to rebuild theirs. Then, in 1986, 9 years after the second kidnapping, he was arrested again. Different state, different family, different little girl. This time he was convicted of raping a child. He served about a year. Jan grew up. She became an actress. She got married. She had kids of her own. And in 2003, she and her mother sat down and wrote a book about everything that had happened. They called it Stolen Innocence. They went on a book tour, and B, then in his late 60s, started showing up. He stalked the tour. He sat in the back of rooms. He sent threats. At a women's conference in St. George, Utah in March of 2004, a chapter of bikers against child abuse, big guys in vests, the kind of guys you do not want to argue with, formed a wall between Jan and him. He tried to push through. They held. He was arrested for assault and trespass and disorderly conduct, and Jan finally got a lifetime restraining order. 18 months later, facing sentencing on those charges, B mixed a glass of Kahlua and milk, dropped in a fatal dose of his heart medication, and drank it. He died in November of 2005, 69 years old. He never spent a real prison term for what he did to Jan Broberg. Bob Broberg died in 2018. Mary Ann died on the very last day of 2025. Jan today runs a foundation in her own name, supporting survivors of childhood sexual abuse. She has said over and over that her parents were victims of the same man she was, that he got inside their heads too, and she has forgiven them. But I want to tell you one more thing about Jan, and it is the thing I cannot get out of my head. Because for a long time when people heard this story, they fixated on the parents or the affairs or the 10-day sentence. They missed the actual horror of it. The actual horror was not what B did to Jan's body. It was what he did to her mind. Remember the deal the voices on the tapes had made with her. She had to bear BTK's child. She could never be with another boy. If she failed, if she broke the rules, her family would die. And the tapes had been very specific about one detail. They told her that to complete the alien mission, she would have to make sure her younger sister never grew up to make the same mistake. Susan would have to be protected from her own future, spared from the same fate. Sent ahead, the voices said, so that Jan could follow. So one night, when Jan was 15 years old, still living in that house in Pocatello, still hearing the voices, she got hold of a handgun. She loaded it. And she walked in the dark down the hallway to the bedroom of her little sister Susan, to kill Susan in her sleep, and then to turn the gun on herself and finish the mission B had written into her head. She did not pull the trigger. Something, call it grace, call it the last sane piece of a 12-year-old still buried in there, stopped her in that doorway. She put the gun down. She walked back to her own room, and she never told a soul, not for years. That is how far inside her head he got. That is what the man from church, the second father, the family friend, almost made a 12-year-old do to a 6-year-old, in the middle of a quiet street in Pocatello, Idaho, while everyone slept. And every time somebody tells this story and stops at the kidnappings, I want you to remember the hallway. Because that is the part he almost got away with, too. Jan Broberg is alive. She is well. She runs a foundation that helps other survivors find their way out of the same kind of fog she had to claw out of, alone at 15, in a hallway in Idaho. If this case stayed with you the way it stays with me, if you want to know what other stories of strange, dark, and quiet evil are hiding behind ordinary front doors, subscribe. A new investigation every week. Take care of the people next to you. I'll see you on the next one.